Welcome everybody. My name is 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗲𝘃. I am a developer advocate at Timescale, and today my idea is go a bit further from the previous episode. So until now we are using Ruby to create some helpers that can be embedded into your code to empower your data migrations, your Rails migrations, and it can also offer some nice DSL for it. But looking to some issues that people that are trying to use Timescale with Rails, it seems like when you use rakedb, test, prepare, and restore, you don't have the proper environment for making it available. So let's say you just get the table structure, but not the hypertable trigger and so on. So let's take a look at this and let's fix it. Let's work on this small Rails app that we can be covering today. So we are going to use the Ruby quick start here. So let me just create a new window here so I can also share. So here is the Ruby quick start, and this is the, let's say, the basics that you can use. So let me also share this in the chat so people can see it live. And basically this tutorial shows you how to create a simple page load model that will be holding everything you need to, let's say, track the time you spend on every request. So this example does not contain any tests. So now we are going to get exactly this example, and we are going to put RSpec to run, and then later we will see what kind of issues and incompatibilities we get because we don't have the Timescale configured for testing environment. So let's start with this one. So just to recap where we were before, we create these two Timescale helpers that is, let's say, the main code that we use here to wrap our functions. So it allows us to just use this include here, Timescale Hypertable helpers, and what it empowers is like this event class can contain several small methods here, like last hour, last week, or even like chunks to know what are the chunks of the hypertable. And but we have this issue that like we are just like playing in this let's say environment that is not very complex, like a Rails ecosystem that you can play with multiple environments. So we are going to reuse our helpers here to just like bring the concepts that we want to the system. So let's start with the helpers we have here. The most important one that we have here is the Timescale Hypertable helpers. So let's take a look on this, and this is the chunk that we have this concept here, and the chunk is basically a kind of like Timescale record, but you cannot insert here, and it's getting from view. So we use it like to just filter here, and we can get more metadata about how the data is inside and so on. So let's move on and see how it looks like when we get into a Rails app here. So Rails app is already here. in the models here, you can see we just have the page load, and if we get here bundle exec 𝗏𝗀𝗃 or console, we can see, let me increase the font size a bit, sorry, missed this, it was not good enough. So here I can try here like page load dot first, it will say news, but I can just see what I have here. So it can be easily populated by accessing any routes in my system. So here in the app controllers, page loads controllers, we have here set page load, but we inherit the application controller. So on the application controller, we have this around action. So this is the cool part of using Rails hooks. So we do a hook to get the method of any action, and then we execute the action, but we wrap it into a benchmark measurement, so we can get the real time that was used to process it. And then we do like a page load create for this page, and we set some details there. So we can test it. It's quite simple to test. So let's just jump here, bundle exec Rails server, and oops. Oh yeah, this is just a problem. Yes, so I need to remove this file because I don't have it yet. We are going to use it later, and here we need to get this page load. And while we don't have the Hypertable helpers here, we can remove it. So now probably we can run the server. Yeah, I was testing these changes before start, so yeah, that was like a part that I missed. So yeah, my server is running. If I get some browser here, localhost 3000. So if I get here slash page loads, oops, yeah, I have some problems with today because my class was not with the methods I was working, but yeah, that's fine. I can just fix this by going to the page load index. Yeah, so let me remove this today thing, because yeah, probably we don't have this today, yesterday, that concept. And if we refresh, we can see here, and now when we refresh again, we have 2 page loads and the page loads average and everything. So every time I refresh the page, it will create a new record and show in this small thing here. So, and now if we jump into the database, in the console, we can see here page load.count, and we have like 5, and let's get 1 here. So yeah, we have the user agent and user agent and the path and the performance. So that is the value for this, the time that it spends. A moment. Okay, just a feedback to increase a bit of the volume. Let me improve this. Maybe now it's a bit better. I'm also not on Twitch TV, not sure if I have any people saying anything here in the chat. So let me just confirm and get alive. Yeah. Good. Okay. Okay. So continuing here, we have this model, and the things that we don't have any tests for the model, so this can become a real problem. And we need to fix it by creating an environment for it. So let's do it step by step. Just drink some water. Hydrating is very important. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is bundle add RSpec Rails. So we'll need to add the RSpec Rails here. We can also say that we need to have like bundle exec RSpec Rails generate RSpec install, sorry. And yeah, so now we have the spec helper. And if you try to run here bundle exec RSpec, for example, we don't have any tests and we don't have any problem. But let's say I need to get something from page load that will use like time bucket function. So to use time bucket function, it would need to be a Hypertable, and that's the issue that we are going to see here now. So bundle exec 𝗥𝗲𝗃 test prepare, and it's the comma. Oops, sorry, test. I have a typo here. So this is the command that copies the schema from development to test. So every time you start running, it will let's say swipe the database and just like copy this DDL structure and try to run over. So this structure can be found here on schema.rb. So you can see here, like we have the enable extension here, and we have a create table, but this create table doesn't the Hypertable options. So let's say we need to execute some extra line here saying create Hypertable, like something like select create Hypertable, and then pass the table name here, and then use like created at column, for example. And this is what we need to do. This is not like pretty straightforward because this file is generated automatically and it does not know anything about Timescale. Like it's like just a database, and what we are going to do is like discover it by trying to run the tests and doing something related to Timescale. So let's start with this small let's say this idea of using our helpers to build everything that we need. So let's create here config initializers slash timescale.rb. So here we are going to say, for example, require. So we have this lib folder, so we can say timescale slash hyper slash all, for example. So we can just add all files there, and let's create the all files. So lib timescale, we don't have the lib folder, so let's create the folder, lib slash timescale, and then now we can say tab new lib timescale all.rb. So here we can add all require relative of what we have into our Ruby example project. So we have this Timescale helpers chunk and Hypertable helpers. So let's move one by one there. So mv timescale chunk to Rails app lib timescale. Let's rename it to just chunk. That will be much easier to understand, right? Okay, and then we can, oh, my idea was not to move, so let me just copy this to timescale chunk.rb, because this is my example that's working, right? So let me just keep a copy here, and I will copy the next one. So let's copy timescale helpers to Rails app lib timescale helpers.rb. Okay, and now I can now cp timescale hypertable helpers to timescale hypertable helpers.rb. Okay, so now we have all the files there, and we can just ls here. Oh, sorry, lib timescale. So we see we have chunk helpers and hypertable helpers. So let's add helpers and hypertable helpers. Hypertable helpers. And I guess the helpers here is the migration helpers, and maybe you can also say it migration helpers. And yeah, so we can rename it. Okay, migration helpers. So it's also using the same name, so it's good and convenient for loading the classes. And we have the migration helpers, so we need to say here on the timescale/all we call migration helpers, and we also have hypertable helpers. So let's take a look on hypertable helpers, and here we have like require relative chunk. Now we rename it to just chunk, and yeah, so now let's say we have all the helpers we have before, but in a Rails ecosystem, so we can go forward and try to use this. So my first test here, that is like spec, let's call it page load spec.rb. So here we can call require Rails helper, and then we can say RSpec.describe, and then we can say page load and do, and then here let's try something like what we have here. We added these hypertable helpers, and we have this scope of chunks, so we collect metadata, so we can test that we should have chunks in somehow if we are inserting into a hypertable, and we should at least change to one chunk when we insert one data there, right? So this is very simple, and let's try to build some tests that covers this. So hypertable helpers are available here, but they are still not included into our page load here. So let's just add here include timescale hypertable helpers. Okay, and now if we include timescale hypertable helpers, and for example coming here to Rails app bundle exec Rails console, I will get into the terminal, so I can say page load dot chunks. Oops, I need to just connect to the database once first. Okay, now I can say chunks. Undefined method chunks for class. Okay, so we got an error here saying that hypertable helpers, oh, probably it's extend, let's say. Okay, now it says I don't have the timescale here. So that's good. So at least we know that we have a problem with our initializer. So here we are just adding this require relative, and this is on timescale all, but we have one initializer that is this one. So when we call it timescale, so it should be loaded, but it's loading under Spring. So bundle exec Spring stop. Let's run it again. Probably it's Spring. Spring is like a bootload system. So yeah, now we have the timescale here, and probably if we get the page load first, it will work. And if we get the page load.chunks, we can see, oops, not yet. Okay, so let me just switch back here to include, because maybe that was my misunderstood in the beginning. And yes, now we have page load.chunks. So as you can see, we have a chunk, and this is on Rails console, and this Rails console is on development environment. So it's okay because we run the migrations on the development environment, and that works fine. But if we try to do this same thing on the testing environment, so I can pass here test, for example, and then I can see here page load. Okay, first, okay, I don't have any page load. And then let's say create new. I don't remember the params. Create user. And then I can say path slash, and then I can say performance 0.4, for example. Okay, I created one data here. So now let's say it should create a chunk, but let's go and try to say page load.chunks. So it does not contain any chunk because it's not a hypertable. Let's just confirm this by switching to Rails DB here, so we can just go to the database in the same environment, and we can just see here the page loads, and this is like a table. Oh, sorry, let me just put d plus here, and you can see this table does not contain anything here related to like trigger for hypertable or subtables or child tables. So it's not a hypertable. That's the problem. We have the timescale extension, but we don't have a command to just say that's a hypertable. So that's what we need to build. That's what we need to fix now. So how we can build this for the testing environment and in a way that it will be reasonable for us to understand. So let's try to do it, let's say using TDD now. So as we saw that we created this page load, so we can say here, for example, \q. I have this small example of creation, right? And so I can just say here specify do and expect do. So specify is like a multi-code block when you have a much more complex scenario to change. So the change also receives a code block, so I can test some specific expression. So I can say here, for example, page load chunks dot size from 0 to 1. So when we create the first page load, the database will be empty, so we will not have any chunks, and then it should create and provide the first chunk. So we are testing if it will work. So but if we wanted to create here some scenario, we can say describe, create, and then we can say it works like as a hypertable. So we can say like this. And now we have a failing test scenario to work on. So this is a bit abstract, but yeah, that's what we are going to do. RSpec. Okay. So running RSpec. It did not change. So that's our objective, and now we have this much clear way of doing this. So it's not okay. So we need to find a way to ingest this, and the way our spec works is it contains several hooks. So we can introduce a new hook here, a new hook to be configuring this suite and improving it. So I would like to start by just introducing this hook. So we can go to Spec Rails Helper, and here is like a few checks we have, and here we have like this configuration, and this is very well commented, and we can add a new configuration here. So let's say timescale before start suite set hypertables. So this will be a very cool challenge. Before suite do. So here we have a before block. I don't remember quite well how we are going to do that, but we need to start somewhere. So let's add some debug here, and let's see where we are when we run this now again. So before suite runs once, before all the specs, before the entire test suite, no matters if you're running a single spec or 10 specs, and then we get here. So let's see what we have in the self here. We are in a group. For some reason it's breaking my terminal, but no matter. We have what we have here is we can get like application record, for example, and it's an application class, and we have descendants of the application record. And this descendants is the one that we are going to iterate to trying to find all the models that are hypertables. So that's our question. So how can we discover? And the thing that we added here can be the small solution for us. So for example, here in the page load, we added these Hypertable helpers. So these Hypertable helpers is like a specific module, and with the abstract metadata that we have about the objects, we can discover it. So let's discover how we can check this metadata if this is included. So if I get here, like we know that this is calling page load, so let's get directly page load here, and let's call here this ancestors. Oops. Oh, it was a typo. Yay! And here you can see that Timescale Hypertable helpers are available here. So we can try to get some abstract expression here saying, oops, not ancestors, sorry, descendants of this class. We are going to select them and select the class based on the ancestors of this class. So let's ask this question: class ancestors dot include timescale helpers. Okay, we have the page. So now let's just do something here very easy to go. Let's create another regular table to confirm that it works. It seems like working, as like if I check some, let's say string, it will say false because it's not a string. So this seems working. So this is the way that we need to iterate over what's Hypertable and what's not. So through our small helper, we can find all the models, and then we can iterate and execute some code there. So let's remember where we are. We are here. So I can try here application record connection. Okay, I have the connection here, and through the connection I can execute some code, some SQL code, and this is nice, it's working. So now we can execute some code here based on this expression. So this is the first line. This is a bit confusing to be just executing here. So let's move here to our helpers, to our Rails helper where we are. So this is the first thing. So this is the Hypertable models equal descendants. So let's break it to be beautiful and easy to understand, and then now we can just iterate over these Hypertable models. Hypertable models each do Hypertable class. So let's call it class, as we have the class there. And then we have, like, for example, if I call here like page load table name, I get the table name. So I will use exactly this to feed our connection. So application record, connection include execute, and then let's create some SQL here, and here we can say select create Hypertable, and then we can pass the class table name, and then we can say here statically created at, and that's like the start for what we need, like just create the Hypertable, and then it will be on before suite, right? So before, we are going to come here and just execute this code if we need. So we can also put some extra pattern here that is like if not exists true. So it will help us to just get some weird message along. Maybe we are going to get some message saying that it's already there. So let's see how it will behave. So we can even let's say copy and paste this in the command line, but let's do a single run here. So I can use this bang 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 to get out of the command line, and if I run it again, now I have an error. Page load is not empty. So you need to say migrate data, because I was just doing some weird stuff in my database. So let me just concatenate here rake db test prepare, and then I run RSpec later. So db test prepare will drop the database and recreate it. So And now the test works. So we got the chunks moving and so on. So that's the first part. And now, for example, let's come here. Works as a hypertable. So I would like to say something different here. I would like to say hypertable dot exists from false to true. Yeah, I don't know if I can say it, but yeah. But yeah, this is the one idea around it, and this is what we can do. So let's try to move into this direction. So how we can do that? So first thing is that we have these let's say hypertable helpers, right? So hypertable helpers, they are here, and here we have these scope chunks, and we are going to do something very similar here for hypertable. So let's say like this is like a has many hacked for this, because we don't have the foreign keys as Rails, so we are using just like a scope to wrap this up, and then we don't concatenate it properly. But in the scope of hypertable, I can just say here hypertable table, and as we have the chunk, so chunk, let's save as hypertable. So let me move this to hypertable here, and I will not need anything of this for now. But the cool part here is that I have a similar view in this system that I can benefit here. So hypertable will be here, and then I can try to ask about it in my system. So let's see if it works. Page load dot hypertable. Okay, I don't have it because I forgot to include it in the require. I have this, but in this require relative here, I need to also hypertable here. So yes, and let's see if it works now. Let's just refresh here, reload bank. Hypertable does not, there is no concept like this. Okay, so when I try here, I need to say, let me just confirm, Timescale Hypertable. Okay, the name looks fair. For some reason here I am on this require relative, but I'm doubting this is like a Spring stop problem. So let me just refresh Spring. Spring is good, but it's bad, and when it fails, it's very bad. So let's try again with the page load now. Page load dot hypertable. Yay, here is the hypertable. So for example, in this case, it found a single record, and we can just move it to be like find by. So let me try to reload. It does not get in this quite well. Let's see. Yeah, now I got just the record. So I can also ask here like exists. Yeah, I cannot do that because I'm using find by. But I guess if I keep where, it would work. So for example, let's just move to these more concrete examples. If I say timescale here, let me move it up. So the table name here is page loads, and then I will receive this. but this is a kind of proxy thing. So if I get here the class, it's like a relation, so I can do nested things here. So for example, I can ask it exists, for example, or I can ask here count, and this is also very good for what we want. So I guess if I do, for example, here I was trying to mimic this, but I would need to use like limit one dot exists, or like I can ask here any, and yeah. So and then we could use this idea to say to our let's say, I'm sorry, I closed the file, Rails helper, to our Rails helper here to select the proper files. So instead of just like we get like application descendants.grep, so here now we can just say like sorry, I can just do next here, like for example, next if class dot Hypertable exists, and then when I run, because when I run the RSpec multiple times, what it will do, it will not, let's say, truncate the full database. So it creates like release points, and then several times it will be there or it will not be there. So if we can skip it, we can save some milliseconds, and we can save just this go back and forth with creating or not creating the hypertables. Okay, so yeah, and let's see now if let's say if this will take any effect. But yeah, we can just say something here like and we can say skip recreating hypertable, for example. Okay, so now we can just put it here and just see when we get it, when we don't get it, and then for example this setup, now we don't need the if not exists, like this is also like needed, otherwise we are going to skip it. And we can also say here, instead of log, we can use a logger.info. So we can try to run RSpec with the test prepare. So it will probably not create something. Oops, I got an error there, class. Oops, this error is because I have this param class with two z's, because the class is a reserved word. So let me move it to z's. Okay, let's see now. Yes, it works, but we can just do like tail -f log/test.rb. I will just detach it from screen, so every time we run it again, we'll get it. And let's see if I try to run it again. Okay, I don't have a logger there. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me just see. I guess I can get it from application record. Yeah, it works because it was there. It was saying that it was trying to use the logger. So it's keep recreating Hypertable. Oops, some typo there. Hypertable for page loads. Let's quote it as, yeah. So now we can see when we are recreating the Hypertable and so on. And yeah, so I think now is the perfect time to discuss these options. They are not really perfect. Like, we are just let's say stealing the table name and getting where we are using Timescale Helper. So maybe that's not the best option to everybody, but you can approach it into some, let's say, automated way that can get you there. And the thing here, like, we get this descendants, and then we use create Hypertable, but we are not really passing the rest of the options like we build here in this. Let's get back to our Ruby simple example, all-in-one. So here in the all-in-one, we have these Hypertable options. So we can pass like, what's the time column? What's the chunk time interval, compress segment by, and compression interval, and so on. So this looks very interesting, but it's a problem now that we need to just make sure we agree in where we want to keep this trade-off of keeping this here or duplicating it, or even having different configurations. For example, if I am the developer, I would probably like use a very big chunk time interval in the testing environment just to have always one single chunk. And maybe like I would even not enable compression because I don't need it. I would just record, set up with a few records. But let's say like we don't have these options while we are setting it here, because we don't have these options in the model. So we need to do something. For example, we could come here like in the page load, and then like we could say set Hypertable options. For example, self.hypertable options, something like that. And then if we define it here, then we can come here and also let's say when we are doing this, instead of doing this application record connection dot execute here, we can just call it like setup Hypertable options, and then we can use here class dot Hypertable options. So that would be like a second approach to follow, like, but I'm not sure like this is the best one. Like maybe we would even create like an environment based one, because like testing, production, staging would have like very different scales. So I think it makes sense to keep it isolated, but that's something that we can discuss. So if you have any opinion, if you want to share about it, I would be very happy to be let's say understanding how you think about it. So yeah. Okay, we don't have any news in the chat. And yes, so that's one of the ideas that you can develop yourself. Like this would be like a very good win to be using. And this like also is kind of closing this series of episodes to help you to set up these basic things. And the next steps, we are probably going to dive into more advanced topics on let's say packing it as a gem, or we are going to go deeper on continuous aggregates, or other kinds of mechanisms that we have inside, and then we are going to create helpers and keep evolving these small helpers. So if you are interested in push it as a Ruby gem and help us with this work, we are very open for it. Like I'm thinking about packing it, but we are still not sure about we are going to maintain it. But the main idea here is like we have a set of helpers, so you can just pick them, copy and paste, put it inside your project. You can easily do the maintenance or set your defaults as you need. So I hope you liked this, and I hope you had this as a funny exercise with the Ruby code, and probably we can try to follow up with these exercises of making these concerns and this metadata available through environments. We could also, for example, export the metadata from development and reuse it on the testing environment as a second option. We could like intercept the DB schema dump from the Rails tasks and implement it inside the DB schema. So there are several options, but probably on the development, it will be a very different experience based on what kind of software are you doing, what kind of application are you doing, and how heavy is your test and everything there. So be mindful before like just setting up like a lot of things without need, like, oh no, let's use everything as Hypertable. But if you don't need it, it will be light as without the Hypertables in the test environment, but you will lose some of the available functions there. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any comments, drop a line. You can also join our Slack community. So let me just share the link here, and I will just share it on our website too, on our links, and I hope to see you next week. We are going to continue our adventures on Ruby or some other interesting topics on the go. So thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.